A medic's race against the night. The night was a living thing, its breath cold and jagged, wrapping the Donbas front line in a shroud of frost and fear. In a crumbling schoolhouse turned medical outpost, Yana, a young Ukrainian combat medic, knelt beside a wounded soldier, her hands trembling as she pressed a bandage against his chest. The air was thick with a metallic tang of blood and the sharp sting of antiseptic, cut by the distant rumble of artillery. A single lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced across the cracked walls, its dim light barely reaching the soldier's pale face. His eyes wide with pain locked onto Yana's, a silent plea for life, in a place where death lingered too close. Outside, the whine of a drone sliced through the darkness, its mechanical hum, a predator's call. Yana's heart pounded each beat, a reminder of the danger overhead. The schoolhouse, half destroyed by shelling, offered little protection, its windows shattered, its roof gaping. She knew a single strike could end them all. Yet her hands moved with practiced urgency, tying off the bandage, checking the soldier's pulse. His name was Andriy, a volunteer from Kharkiv, his breath shallow but stubborn. "Stay with me," Yana whispered, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her brow. The drone's hum grew louder, closer, a threat that could pinpoint their light, their heat, their hope. Yana's fingers brushed the embroidered patch on her sleeve, a small Ukrainian flag stitched by her sister. It was her anchor, a reminder of why she was here, why she hadn't turned back. She glanced at the other medics, Larissa, her mentor, and Katerina, barely out of training, moving silently among the wounded, their faces taut with focus. The schoolhouse was a fragile island in the chaos of the Donbas, a place where lives hung in the balance, where every second was a gamble. Another explosion rocked the ground closer this time, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Yana flinched, but didn't stop, her hands steady, her resolve fiercer than the fear clawing at her chest. She thought of her home in Chernivtsi, of her mother's garden where poppies bloomed red against the green. She thought of the promise she'd made when she joined the medical unit in 2022, to save as many as she could, to be the light in the dark. Andriy's hand twitched, his fingers brushing hers, a faint spark of fight left in him. Yana leaned closer, her voice a murmur. "You're going home, Andriy. Hold on." The drone's hum faded for a moment, a fleeting reprieve, but the artillery's roar grew, a reminder that the night was far from over. How had she come to this moment, kneeling in a ruined schoolhouse with lives slipping through her fingers? Days ago, she'd been at a rear base laughing with her team over weak tea, their voices a shield against the war's weight. Now she was here in the heart of the Donbas, where the line between life and death was as thin as the lantern's glow. The story of this night began not with the drone's hum or Andriy's fading breath, but with a choice, one that had led Yana and her team from safety to the edge of survival. The scene faded, the drone's hum lingering like a ghost, as memory pulled her back to the days before, to the moments that shaped her path to this front line. This story was inspired by real events and people. Some details have been fictionalized for emotional narrative purposes. Donbas battlefield. A landscape of war. The Donbas in late 2022 was a land carved by conflict, its rolling plains and industrial towns transformed into a patchwork of trenches and ruins. The schoolhouse where Yana and her medical unit operated stood on the outskirts of a small town near Bakhmut, a place once known for its quiet streets and coal dust air. Now it was a focal point of the war, its name whispered among soldiers as a crucible of endurance. The town's heart, a cluster of low-rise buildings, a church, a market square, was pocked with craters, its homes reduced to skeletal frames. Beyond, the town fields stretched toward the horizon, their golden grasses trampled into mud, scarred by tank tracks and littered with the remnants of war-twisted metal, abandoned gear, a child's forgotten toy, half buried in the earth. The air was sharp with the bite of November, a cold that seeped through layers of clothing and settled in the bones. A thin frost coated the ground, crunching underfoot, while a persistent mist clung to the low hills, blurring the line between earth and sky. The weather was both a shield and a foe. The mist hid movements, but slowed progress, turning roads into quagmires that sucked at boots and tires. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the ground slick and heavy, each step a battle against the mud's pull. The sky, a relentless gray, offered no warmth, only the occasional flare that painted the clouds red, a fleeting warning of the violence to come. The war had raged since February 2022, its rhythm a relentless pulse across Ukraine's east. In the Donbas, fighting was constant, a grinding struggle for control of towns, roads, and ridges. The Ukrainian forces, a mix of volunteers, conscripts, and seasoned soldiers, held the town's western edge, their positions fortified with sandbags and makeshift barriers. Their numbers were stretched thin, their equipment a patchwork of donated supplies and aging relics, yet their resolve was unyielding. Across the fields and hills, their opponents maintained a loose but formidable presence, their movements hidden by distance and the fog of war. Both sides were locked in a dance of attrition, each maneuver a calculation of survival. The schoolhouse, once a place of chalkboards and laughter, was now a medical outpost, its walls scarred by shrapnel, its floors stained with the urgency of saving lives. Yana's unit, a team of 6 female medics supported by a handful of soldiers, operated under constant strain. Their task was to stabilize the wounded and prepare them for evacuation to a field hospital 20 kilometers west, a journey fraught with danger due to drone activity and shelling. Supplies were scarce, bandages and morphine rationed, each delivery delayed by the same mud that slowed their steps. The medics worked in shifts, their hands never idle, their minds never at rest. The broader world cast a long shadow over the Donbas. News of the conflict flickered through radio's stories of distant capitals sending aid or debating strategies. But here in the town's ruins, such matters felt abstract, detached from the immediate reality of frostbitten fingers and fading pulses. The soldiers and medics spoke little of politics, their focus narrowed to the next hour, the next life. Yet the weight of global attention was felt, a reminder that their struggle was watched, judged, and remembered by those far from the mud and cold. Yana had arrived 3 days earlier, part of a rotation sent to reinforce the overstretched medical team. The Donbas was new to her, its harshness a stark contrast to the training camps in western Ukraine. She'd seen war before in makeshift clinics near Kharkiv, but the Donbas was different. Its intensity unrelenting, its landscape unforgiving. The town's strategic value lay in its position along a key supply route, a road both sides coveted. Skirmishes flared without warning, artillery barrages turning day into night, drones weaving through the sky like ghosts. Yana's team was a lifeline, their outpost a beacon for the wounded, yet every moment carried the risk of becoming a target. The cold was a constant companion, numbing hands and slowing movements. Yana's breath hung in the air as she moved through the schoolhouse, her medical kit a familiar weight. The mist outside was both ally and enemy, concealing her team from prying eyes but hiding dangers in its folds. The hills beyond the town were a maze of sniper nests and hidden positions, each ridge a potential threat. Communication was spotty, reliant on radios that crackled with static, their signals often lost to the terrain's interference. The medics relied on instinct as much as training, their decisions made in the flicker of lantern light under the shadow of drones. This was the world Yana and her team navigated, a place where time was measured in heartbeats, where survival demanded both skill and will. The schoolhouse, with its broken desks and faded maps, was their sanctuary and their battleground. Yana's thoughts often drifted to Chernivtsi, to her mother's garden, to the life she'd left behind. But those thoughts were fleeting, drowned by the urgency of the present. The night of the drone, the night that would test her, was hours away. But its weight already pressed against her, a promise of the trials to come. The Donbas was a crucible forging those who walked its paths. Yana, Larisa, Katerina. The women of the medical unit carried their own stories, their own dreams into this unforgiving land. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense, yet their courage was no less vital, their hands a bridge between life and death. As they prepared for the night ahead, the town stood silent, its ruins holding their breath, waiting for the storm that would break before dawn. Women on the front lines. Yana Vasilik, 24, carried the spirit of Chernivtsi in her steady hands and quiet resolve. Her slight frame belied a strength honed by months on the front line, her dark eyes holding both compassion and a flicker of fear she'd learned to tame. Raised in a modest house where poppies bloomed in her mother's garden, Yana grew up with stories of resilience, her grandmother's tales of surviving hardship, her father's quiet pride in their homeland. She'd studied nursing, dreaming of a life tending to the sick in her city's hospital, but the war's eruption in 2022 reshaped her path. When the call came for medics, Yana volunteered, driven by a need to protect the life she'd known. Her mother Oksana had pressed a small Ukrainian flag patch into her hand, its stitches a silent vow. "Come back to me," Oksana whispered, her voice heavy with unspoken dread. In the Donbas schoolhouse, Yana's inner world was a delicate balance of duty and longing. She feared the moment her hands might fail, yet she clung to the hope that each life saved was a step toward peace. She missed her sister Sophia, whose letters arrived sporadically filled with sketches of flowers and words of love. The patch on Yana's sleeve was her talisman, a reminder of home amidst the chaos. Her fear was not of death, but of losing herself, of becoming numb to the pain she saw daily. Yet each bandage she tied, each pulse she steadied was a defiance of that fear, a reclaiming of her purpose. Larisa, 32, was the unit's anchor, her weathered hands and sharp wit a steadying force. From Dnipro, where she'd worked as an emergency room nurse, Larisa had seen life's fragility long before the war. Her decision to join the medical unit came after losing her brother in the conflict's early days, a loss she carried silently, her grief channeled into saving others. Her short-cropped hair framed a face, etched with lines of experience, her eyes quick to spot a faltering pulse or a wavering spirit. Larisa's humor was dry. Her stories of pre-war life, late nights in Dnipro's cafes, dancing with her husband, offered rare moments of levity. She dreamed of a day when she could return to those cafes, but for now, her focus was the team, her family in this broken place. Katerina, barely 20, was the youngest, her wide eyes and nervous energy betraying her inexperience. A student from Sumy, she'd been in her first year of medical school when the war began. Her choice to volunteer was impulsive, driven by a fierce love for her country and a need to prove herself. Katerina's hands shook when she first stitched a wound, but Larisa's guidance and Yana's encouragement steadied her. She carried a small locket, a gift from her father, its tiny photo of her family, a tether to home. Katerina's inner world was a storm of doubt and determination. She feared she wasn't enough yet. Her resolve grew with each life she helped save. She dreamed of finishing her studies of a world where her skills weren't needed in war. There was also Andriy, the wounded soldier Yana tended that night, a volunteer from Kharkiv with a farmer's build and a quiet faith. At 26, he'd left his family's orchard to join the fight, his hands more accustomed to pruning trees than holding a rifle. His dreams were simple: to see his daughter grow to walk his fields again. His injury, a chest wound from shrapnel, had brought him to the schoolhouse, his life now in Yana's hands. His eyes, when they met hers, carried a gratitude that cut through the pain, a silent bond formed in the flicker of lantern light. These women, Yana, Larisa, Katerina, were the heart of the medical unit. Their lives interwoven in the schoolhouse's dim glow. They were not soldiers, yet their courage was no less vital, their hands a bridge between life and death. They shared quiet moments, Larisa's stories, Katerina's nervous laughter, Yana's soft humming of a folk song. They carried their homes in their hearts, Chernivtsi's gardens, Dnipro's rivers, Sumy's quiet streets. Their fears were shared too, of failing, of losing each other, of a future forever marked by war. Yana's thoughts often returned to Sophia's sketches, to the poppies in her mother's garden. She wondered if her sister still drew, if her mother still prayed for her safety. Larisa thought of her husband, of the life they'd rebuild when the war ended. Katerina clung to her locket, to the hope of proving herself worthy. Andriy, in his fleeting moments of consciousness, thought of his daughter's smile, a light he refused to let fade. These private worlds, fragile and fierce, were what kept them moving through the Donbas's cold and chaos. In the schoolhouse, the women worked as one, their hands a symphony of care. Yana's precision, Larissa's experience, Katerina's raw determination. They complemented each other, their bond forged in shared purpose. They were daughters, sisters, wives, yet here they were medics, their lives defined by the lives they saved. The night ahead would test them, its dangers looming like the drones overhead. But they carried on, their hearts beating against the dark, their hands steady with the weight of hope. Marching to hot spot. The Donbas night was a canvas of shadow and frost, its silence broken only by the crunch of boots on frozen mud and the faint hum of a distant drone. Yana adjusted the straps of her medical kit, its weight a familiar burden, as she followed her team through the ruins of the town near Bakhmut. The orders had come at dusk. Move to a forward aid station closer to the front line, a makeshift post in an abandoned factory just beyond the town's edge. The station was needed to support a unit holding a critical ridge where fighting had intensified. For Yana, Larissa, and Katerina, it meant stepping deeper into the war's heart, where the line between safety and chaos was razor thin. The medical unit, 6 women escorted by a small group of soldiers, moved in a tight formation, their silhouettes blending into the mist. Yana walked near the center, her breath visible in the cold, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Larissa led her steps steady, her flashlight a dim guide through the rubble-strewn streets. Katerina at the rear clutched her kit tightly, her nervous energy palpable even in the dark. The soldiers, led by a grizzled sergeant named Pavlo, flanked them, their rifles ready, but their faces weary. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke, a reminder of the shells that had fallen hours earlier, their echoes still lingering in Yana's mind. The town was a ghost, its streets lined with shattered homes and overturned carts. A street lamp, miraculously intact, flickered weakly, casting a pale glow over a child's mitten lying in the dirt. Yana's heart tightened at the sight, her thoughts flashing to Sophia's sketches of flowers, to a life untouched by war. She pushed the memory aside, focusing on the path ahead. The ground was uneven, slick with frost and mud, each step a test of balance. The cold bit at her fingers, numbing them despite her gloves, but she kept them flexed, ready for the work that awaited. Sound was their guide and their betrayer. The wind carried fragments of noise, a dog's bark, the creak of a distant shutter, the low thrum of artillery far off. Each sound made Yana's pulse quicken, her senses tuned to the possibility of danger. Drones were the ever-present threat, their mechanical hum, a ghost in the night sky. Pavlo at the front raised a hand to halt the group when the hum grew too close, their bodies dropping low behind a collapsed wall. Yana's heart pounded, her eyes searching the sky for the drone's silhouette, her hands gripping her kit as if it could shield her. The hum faded, and they moved on, their steps quicker now, driven by the urgency of reaching the factory. The journey was punctuated by fleeting moments of calm. As they crossed a small bridge over a frozen stream, the mist parted, revealing a sliver of moonlight that danced on the water's surface. Katerina, catching her breath, whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Her voice was soft, almost childlike, and Yana nodded, a brief smile breaking through her tension. Larissa, overhearing, grunted softly. "Keep moving, dreamer," she said, but her tone held warmth, a mother's indulgence. The moment passed, the group pressing forward, their boots crunching against the frost. The terrain grew harsher as they neared the factory. The road gave way to a narrow path, its edges lined with barbed wire and the husks of burned-out vehicles. The mist thickened, curling around their legs, making each step a gamble against hidden obstacles. Yana stayed close to Katerina, sensing the younger woman's unease. One foot in front of the other, she murmured, her voice steadying them both. Katerina nodded, her locket glinting faintly as she adjusted her kit. Pavlo's soldiers spread out their eyes, scanning the hills for movement, their rifles a quiet promise of protection. A sudden flare arced across the sky, its red glow painting the clouds, a signal of the fighting ahead. The group paused, crouching low, their breaths held as the light faded. Larissa's voice cut through low but firm. "We're close. Stay sharp." The factory loomed in the distance, its silhouette a jagged outline against the hills. Its walls were pocked with holes, its smokestacks broken, but it stood as a beacon for the wounded, a place where Yana's team would become the difference between life and death. The final stretch was a climb through a field, littered with debris, shattered concrete, twisted metal, a single boot, half buried in the mud. Yana's legs burned her kit heavier with each step, but she pressed on, driven by the thought of the soldiers waiting at the aid station. Larissa navigated with a map and a flashlight, her experience a steady guide. Katerina stumbled once, her foot catching on a root, but Yana caught her arm, their eyes meeting in a silent pact. Pavlo's soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, their presence a shield against the night's dangers. At the factory's edge, the group paused to regroup. The building was a hulking ruin, its windows dark, its doors hanging off their hinges. The air inside was cold or heavy with the smell of oil and dust. The medics set up quickly, transforming a corner of the factory floor into an aid station. Yana arranged her kit, bandages, tourniquets, morphine, her hands moving on instinct. Larissa checked the radio, her face grim as static crackled through. Katerina, her nerves settling, began unpacking supplies, her hands steadier now. Pavlo's soldiers took positions at the entrances, their eyes on the hills where flashes of light hinted at the battle raging beyond. The tension was a living thing coiling around them as they prepared for the wounded. Yana's thoughts flickered to her mother's garden, to the poppies that bloomed despite the cold. She wondered if Sophia was awake sketching by candlelight, or if her mother was praying for her safety. Larissa's voice broke her reverie, a quiet order to check the supplies again. Katerina hummed a soft tune, a fragment of a folk song, her way of pushing back the fear. The soldiers outside stood silent, their silhouettes sharp against the flare-lit sky. The factory was their new crucible, its walls a fragile barrier against the war outside. Yana felt the weight of her role. Her hands, her team, were the lifeline for those who'd come through the doors. The night was young, its dangers still unfolding, but she stood ready, her patch a small defiance against the dark. The ridge beyond the factory waited, its fate tied to the soldiers fighting there and to the women who would fight to keep them alive. The battle begins, danger and unity. The factory's walls trembled as the first artillery shell struck its roar, shattering the fragile quiet of the Donbas night. Dust rained from the ceiling, coating Yana's hands as she knelt beside her medical kit, her heart lurching with each distant thud. The aid station, hastily set up in a corner of the factory's cavernous floor, was a flicker of light in the dark lanterns, casting shadows across the concrete, their glow barely reaching the wounded already arriving. The ridge beyond the factory, where soldiers fought to hold a critical line, was under heavy fire, and the medics' work had begun before they could fully settle. Yana's fingers moved swiftly, checking bandages and morphine, her eyes darting to the factory's broken entrance, where silhouettes of soldiers carried stretchers through the mist. Larissa, her face etched with focus, directed the team with quiet authority, her voice cutting through the chaos. Yana triage. Katerina prepped the stretchers. Katerina, her hands trembling but obedient, moved to arrange supplies, her locket glinting as she worked. Pavlo's soldiers guarded the entrances, their rifles trained on the darkness, their faces taut with the strain of waiting. The air was thick with the smell of oil and ash, the cold seeping through the factory's shattered walls. A flare arced high outside, its red glow painting the night a stark reminder of the battle raging beyond the ridge. The first wounded arrived in a rush, their uniforms caked with mud, their faces pale under the lantern's light. Yana knelt beside a soldier with a leg wound, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with pain. She worked quickly, applying a tourniquet, her hands steady despite the artillery's relentless rhythm. "You're safe now," she said, her voice a calm anchor, though her pulse raced. The soldier nodded, his grip weak but grateful. Larissa moved to another, her experience guiding her hands as she stabilized a chest wound, her muttered encouragements a lifeline in the dark. The battle's intensity grew, each shell landing closer, their blasts shaking the factory's frame. The medics worked in a blur, their movements a practiced dance, bandaging, injecting, reassuring. Katerina, still green, hesitated once her eyes flickering to a soldier whose arm was badly torn. Yana caught her gaze, offering a nod. "You've got this," she whispered, and Katerina's hand steadied her training taking over. The team's unity was their strength. Each woman a thread in a fragile tapestry, holding together against the night's chaos. Then came the first twist, a sharp crack. Not artillery, but a sniper's shot echoed from the hills. A soldier at the entrance slumped, his body caught by Pavlo before he hit the ground. Yana's heart stopped her training, kicking in as she rushed to him, her hands searching for a pulse. It was faint fading, and she worked desperately, pressing a bandage to his neck, her voice low but urgent. "Stay with me." Pavlo's face was grim, his hands steady as he helped her, but the soldier's eyes grew distant, his breath slowing. Yana fought on her hands, slick with sweat and blood, but the pulse slipped away, leaving a silence heavier than any explosion. The loss was a blow, but there was no time to grieve. The wounded kept coming, carried from the ridge where the fighting raged. The radio, manned by a soldier near Larissa, crackled with frantic reports the ridge was holding, but barely the unit there, outnumbered and outgunned. Drones were active, their hum a constant menace, their thermal eyes scanning for heat, for life. Yana's mind raced, piecing together the tactics. The enemy was pressing the ridge, using artillery to soften defenses, drones to pinpoint targets. The medic's role was clear: keep the wounded alive, give the soldiers a reason to fight on. Another twist struck, the radio went dead, its static replaced by an ominous hum. Larissa cursed softly, tapping the device, her face tight with frustration. Without communication, they were blind. No updates on the ridge, no hope of coordinating evacuations. Yana met Larissa's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. "We keep going," Larissa said, her voice steady despite the strain. Katerina, overhearing, nodded, her locket clutched briefly for courage. The medics redoubled their efforts, moving from stretcher to stretcher, their hands a blur of motion, their voices a chorus of calm in the storm. The factory became a crucible, its walls echoing with the sounds of war artillery, shouts, the clatter of stretchers. Yana tended to Andrei, the soldier from Kharkiv, his chest wound, stabilized but critical. His eyes, when they opened, found hers a flicker of gratitude amidst the pain. "Tell my daughter I tried," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Yana's throat tightened, but she nodded, her hand squeezing his. "You'll tell her yourself," she said, her words a promise she fought to keep. She adjusted his bandage, her hand steady, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. The battle's rhythm was relentless, a cycle of urgency and fleeting pauses. Pavlo's soldiers laid down covering fire at the entrances, their shots a desperate attempt to keep snipers at bay. Larissa's voice, sharp and clear, kept the medics focused, her experience a beacon in the chaos. Katerina, finding her rhythm, moved with growing confidence, her hands quicker now, her fear buried under duty. The team's unity was their lifeline, each woman leaning on the others, their bond forged in the act of saving lives. A sudden explosion rocked the factory closer than before, sending a shower of debris through a broken window. Yana ducked, shielding Andrei with her body, her pulse racing as dust clouded the air. The drones had struck nearby, their payload tearing through a nearby structure. The medics froze, their eyes darting to the ceiling, expecting it to collapse. Larissa's voice broke the silence, calm but urgent. "Keep working, they need us." Yana nodded, her hands returning to Andrei, her focus narrowing to his breath, his pulse, his life. The turning point came with a faint crackle from the radio, a signal breaking through the static. A voice, faint but clear, reported reinforcements approaching, a convoy with air cover 30 minutes out. The news was a spark, a fragile hope amidst the chaos. But the ridge was still under fire, the wounded still pouring in, and the drones still circled. Yana's team worked on their hands, moving in a rhythm of survival: bandage, stabilize, reassure. Each life they saved was a defiance of the night, a testament to their courage. Andrei's condition worsened, his breath shallower, his face paler. Yana stayed with him, her hands steady, her voice a murmur of encouragement. "You're almost there," she said, though the convoy's rumble was still distant. Larissa joined her, checking Andri's vitals, her eyes meeting Yana's with a shared resolve. Katerina, tending to another soldier, glanced over, her face tight with worry, but her hands unwavering. The medics were a unit, their strength in their togetherness, their purpose in the lives they fought to save. The night stretched on, each moment a test of endurance. The factory, its walls scarred and trembling, stood as their sanctuary and their battleground. Yana's thoughts flickered to her mother's garden, to the poppies that bloomed despite the cold. She drew strength from the memory, from the patch on her sleeve, from the women beside her. The ridge, the wounded, the drones, they were all part of a larger fight, one that Yana and her team met with every bandage, every breath, every heartbeat they preserved. Sacrifice. Choosing life and death. The factory trembled under the weight of the night, its walls shuddering with each artillery blast that tore through the Donbas darkness. Yana knelt beside Andri, her hands pressed against his chest, the bandage soaked, but holding his breath a fragile thread. The aid station was a chaos of motion, stretchers, clattering lanterns, flickering medics weaving through the wounded with desperate precision. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and oil, the cold biting through Yana's gloves as she fought to keep Andri alive. Outside, the ridge battle raged, its flashes lighting the sky, the drones hum, a constant menace overhead. Larissa's voice, steady but strained, cut through the din, directing the team, while Katerina's hands, now steadier, worked on a soldier with a shattered arm. The wounded kept coming, carried from the ridge where the line was buckling. Pavlo's soldiers held the factory's entrances, their rifles spitting fire into the dark to keep snipers at bay. The radio revived, but faltering, crackled with reports of the convoy's approach, still 20 minutes out, too long for some of the wounded. Yana's world narrowed to Andri's pulse, weak but stubborn, his eyes flickering with a fading spark. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice a lifeline, though her own fear clawed at her. The drones circled closer, their whine piercing the artillery's roar, their threat a shadow over every movement. Then came the moment that changed everything. A sharp cry from Katerina, her voice high with panic. "Larissa!" The oxygen. Yana's head snapped up, her eyes finding Katerina across the aid station, her hands fumbling with an empty oxygen canister. A soldier, barely conscious, gasped for air, his chest wound, robbing him of breath. The factory's supplies were nearly gone, the last delivery delayed by the mud and shelling. Larissa rushed to Katerina's side, her face grim as she assessed the situation. "We're out," she said, her voice low but heavy with the weight of the truth. Without oxygen, the soldier's chances were slipping away, his lips turning blue under the lantern's glow. Yana's heart sank, her hand still on Andri, her mind racing. The convoy carried oxygen, but it was too far, the road too exposed. The drones were relentless, their payloads a death sentence for anyone caught outside. Yet the soldiers' gasping breaths were a call to action, a challenge to the team's purpose. Larissa's eyes met Yana's, a silent question passing between them. They were medics bound by a vow to save lives, but the factory was a trap. Leaving it meant risking everything. Staying meant watching a man die. The decision fell to Larissa, her experience the team's anchor. She straightened her face, set her voice calm but resolute. "I'm going for the backup kit," she said, nodding toward a storage room at the factory's far end, where a small cache of supplies had been left by a previous unit. The room was across an open courtyard exposed to the drones and snipers, a gauntlet no one had dared cross since nightfall. Yana's breath caught her, protest rising, but Larissa's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Keep them alive, Yana. I'll be back." Her eyes held a quiet fire, a mother's strength, a medic's duty. Katerina's face paled. Her locket clutched tightly, but she nodded, her hands returning to the gasping soldier. Yana wanted to argue to take Larissa's place, but Andri's weakening pulse held her fast. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice breaking. Larissa gave a faint smile, the kind that carried years of loss and resolve, and slipped toward the courtyard, her silhouette low against the factory's broken wall. Pavlo, overhearing, signaled 2 soldiers to cover her, their rifles ready, their faces grim with the risk. The courtyard was a no-man's land, its open space lit by the occasional flare, the frost gleaming under moonlight. Larissa moved like a shadow, her steps quick but deliberate, her medical kit slung across her back. Yana watched from the aid station, her heart in her throat, her hands still working on Andriy. The drone's hum grew louder, a mechanical predator circling closer. A sniper's shot cracked the bullet, striking the ground near Larissa, sending up a spray of dirt. She dropped low, crawling behind a rusted machine, her breath visible in the cold. Pavlo's soldiers fired back their shots, a desperate shield, but the drones were undeterred, their whine a constant threat. Yana's focus split Andriy's fading breath, Larissa's perilous run. The soldier gasping for oxygen. She whispered to Andriy, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You're going home to your daughter." His eyes fluttered, a faint nod, his only response. Katerina, her hands now steady, worked on the other soldier, her voice a soft murmur of encouragement. The team's unity held them together, their purpose a light in the dark, even as Larissa risked everything. The turning point came with a burst of light, a drone strike, its payload hitting the courtyard's edge, the explosion shaking the factory's walls. Yana's heart stopped, her eyes fixed on the smoke where Larissa had been. "No," she whispered, her hands faltering on Andriy. But then a shadow moved Larissa alive, clutching the backup kit, crawling back through the mud. Pavlo's soldiers laid down, covering fire, their shots echoing as Larissa reached the factory's entrance, her face streaked with dirt, her breath ragged but triumphant. She held up the oxygen canister, her eyes meeting Yana's with a fierce nod. "Got it?" she gasped, already moving to the gasping soldier. Katerina took the canister, her hands quick as she hooked it to the mask, the soldier's breaths easing, his color returning. Yana's relief was a flood, but it came with a cost. Larissa's run had been a gamble, her life the price they'd nearly paid. The older medic knelt beside Katerina, her hands steady despite the tremor in her shoulders, her voice calm as she guided the younger woman. "You're doing good, Katya," she said, her words a lifeline for them all. The convoy's rumble grew louder, a faint hope on the horizon. Yana returned to Andriy, her hands adjusting his bandage, her voice a steady murmur. His pulse was stronger now, a small victory against the night. The drones circled their threat undiminished, but the team worked on their hands, a symphony of care. Pavlo's soldiers held the entrances, their faces etched with resolve, their rifles a shield against the dark. Larissa's sacrifice, her run through the courtyard, her defiance of the drones and snipers changed the night's course. The soldier breathed easier, his life preserved by her courage. Yana's heart swelled with gratitude, with awe at the woman who'd risked everything for a stranger. Katerina's hands, once trembling, now moved with purpose, her fear buried under the weight of their shared duty. The factory, its walls scarred and trembling, stood as their battleground, their sanctuary, a place where lives were fought for and won. The night stretched on the ridge, still under fire, the wounded still arriving. Yana's thoughts flickered to her mother's garden, to the poppies that bloomed despite the cold. She drew strength from Larissa's courage, from Katerina's growth, from Andriy's stubborn fight. The team was a family now bound by a choice to face the dark together, to hold fast to life, in a place where it was so easily lost. Calm after the storm, the Donbas night gave way to a dawn that crept slowly over the horizon, its pale light filtering through the factory's broken windows. The artillery had fallen silent, leaving an eerie stillness that felt heavier than the chaos it replaced. Yana sat on the cold concrete floor of the aid station, her medical kit open but nearly empty, her hands stained with blood and dirt. The air was sharp with the scent of antiseptic and ash, the frost outside melting into a thin sheen that gleamed on the ruined machinery. The ridge beyond the factory was secure, for now held by the arriving reinforcements, their convoy's rumble fading into the distance as they carried the wounded away. But the cost of the night lingered, etched into the faces of those who remained. Andriy, the soldier from Kharkiv, had been loaded onto the convoy's medical van, his chest wound stabilized, but his fate uncertain. Yana had watched him go, her heart heavy with the promise she'd made to tell his daughter he'd tried. His eyes flickering with pain and hope, stayed with her a ghost in the morning light. Larissa, her face drawn but resolute, stood nearby, wiping her hands on a rag. Her shoulders slumped from the weight of her run through the courtyard. Katerina, her locket clutched tightly, sat against a wall, her eyes distant, but her hands still as if the night's urgency had drained her. Pavlo's soldiers, fewer now, guarded the factory's entrances, their rifles lowered but their vigilance unbroken. The factory was a relic of the night's fury, its walls pocked with new scars, its floor littered with spent bandages and empty vials. The aid station, once a flurry of motion, was quiet now. The wounded either stabilized or gone, their stretchers left in disarray. Yana's gaze settled on a broken chair, its wooden frame splintered, a silent witness to the lives that had passed through this place. She thought of the soldier they'd lost to the sniper's shot, his name unknown, his face a shadow she couldn't erase. The loss was a wound not just for her, but for the team, a reminder of the lives they couldn't save. The town beyond the factory was a landscape of loss. The ridge, secured at a cost, loomed in the distance, its slopes scarred by craters and churned earth. A single tree, half shattered, stood defiantly, its branches reaching for the gray sky. The road to the factory, once a lifeline, was a mess of mud and debris, its surface glinting with frost and fragments of metal. A scarf, torn and mud-streaked, lay abandoned near the entrance, its blue threads a stark contrast to the monochrome world. Yana didn't pick it up, but its presence lingered, a relic of someone's story, someone's home. The aftermath was not measured in numbers, how many shells fell, how many lives were saved or lost, but in the quiet that followed. Larissa approached Yana, her face softened by exhaustion, and handed her a canteen. The water was cold, metallic, but it grounded them, a small act of connection. "You did good, Yana," Larissa said, her voice low, carrying the weight of their shared night. Yana nodded, her throat tight. "You did more," she replied, thinking of Larissa's run through the courtyard, her defiance of the drones. Larissa's faint smile was her only response, a flicker of warmth in the cold. Katerina rose, her locket tucked back under her uniform, and began gathering the scattered supplies. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if reclaiming purpose from the chaos. She hummed a fragment of a folk song, the notes soft but defiant, a thread of normalcy in the factory's ruin. Pavlo joined them, his grizzled face etched with fatigue, his eyes scanning the team with a quiet pride. "We held," he said simply, his words a testament to their survival. The soldiers nearby shared glances, their silence a bond forged in the dark. The convoy had taken the wounded, including Andriy, to the field hospital 20 kilometers away. A radio message crackling through the static confirmed their arrival, but no word yet on Andriy's condition. Yana clung to the hope that he'd see his daughter again, that her hands had given him a chance. She thought of her mother's garden of the poppies that bloomed despite the frost, and drew strength from the image. The war had taken much lives, homes, dreams, but it hadn't taken her resolve, or the bond she shared with Larissa and Katerina. The team's unity was their anchor, their strength drawn from each other. Larissa's courage, Katerina's growth, Yana's steady hands, they were a family now forged in the crucible of the night. The factory, its walls trembling but standing, was their sanctuary, a place where they'd fought for life and won, if only for a moment. Yana's thoughts drifted to Sophia, to her sister's sketches, to the letters she hadn't had time to write. She wondered if her mother was awake praying for her safety, or if Sophia was drawing by candlelight, capturing the world they hoped to return to. The dawn brought no warmth, its light cold and unyielding, but it revealed the town's resilience. A bird, small and gray, flitted across the factory's courtyard, its wings a blur against the frost. A single flower, trampled but alive, clung to the edge of a crater, its petals a quiet defiance. Yana's heart lifted at the sight, a reminder that life persisted even here. The team was ordered to hold the aid station until further notice, their work far from over. But for now they rested, their faces turned toward the horizon where the ridge stood silent, its battle won but its cost enduring. The aftermath was a pause, a breath between storms. Yana felt the weight of the night. The lives saved the lives, lost the lives, still hanging in the balance. She thought of Larissa's run, of Katerina's steadying hands, of Andri's whispered plea. They were her family, now bound by a night that would live in their bones. The factory, the ridge, the Donbas, they were all part of a larger story, one written in moments of courage and loss, in the silence that followed the chaos. Yana's hands rested on her kit, her fingers brushing the Ukrainian flag patch. It was her mother's gift, a piece of home that had carried her through the dark. She held it tightly, its threads a promise she'd keep fighting, keep saving, keep hoping. The war would go on, its shadow long and unyielding, but so would they. And somewhere in a hospital bed, Andri might open his eyes, his daughter's smile waiting to greet him. Reflection, a message to the viewers. The Donbas dawn stretched across the horizon, its pale light softening the scars of the night. Yana sat on a rusted crate outside the factory, her medical kit at her feet, its contents depleted, but for the Ukrainian flag patch tucked inside. The air was crisp, the frost melting into droplets that clung to the shattered machinery, reflecting the gray sky. The ridge beyond the factory stood silent, its battle won for now, but the town around it remained a ghost, its homes broken, its streets littered with the remnants of war. The quiet was profound, a fragile pause that carried the weight of lives saved and lost. Yana's hands, still stained with blood and dirt, rested in her lap. Her fingers tracing the calluses earned through countless nights like this. She pulled the patch from her kit, its blue and yellow threads vibrant against the monochrome world. It was her mother's gift, a piece of Chernivtsi that had traveled with her through mud and chaos. Holding it to her chest, Yana closed her eyes, her mind drifting to her mother's garden where poppies bloomed red and defiant. She saw Sophia's sketches, her sister's pencil capturing the curve of petals, the hope of spring. She heard her mother's voice, soft but fierce, urging her to come home. The memory was a lifeline, a reminder of why she knelt in the dark, why she fought for every breath, every heartbeat. Yana's thoughts turned to Andri now in the field hospital, his life a fragile thread she'd helped hold together. She didn't know if he'd see his daughter again, but she clung to the hope that her hands had given him a chance. She thought of Larissa, whose run through the courtyard had saved a soldier's breath, her courage a beacon in the night. She thought of Katerina, her hands steadying under pressure, her locket a talisman against fear. The women of the medical unit were her family, now bound by a night that had tested their limits and revealed their strength. The war was a vast, unyielding force, its shadow stretching across the Donbas, across Ukraine, across lives like Yana's. It was a story told in moments of chaos, drones circling shells, falling hands, reaching for hands in the dark. But it was also a story of resilience, of women who carried life in their kits, who defied the cold and fear to keep others alive. Yana had seen the war's cost in the soldier lost to a sniper's bullet, in the faces of the wounded, in the silence that followed their departure. Yet she'd also seen its heart, the bond between her team, the gratitude in a soldier's eyes, the flower that bloomed in a crater's edge. She opened her kit and pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn and smudged from the night's work. With a pencil stub, she began to write her words, uneven but deliberate, a letter to Sophia she might never send. "Dear Sophia," she wrote, "I don't know if I can explain what this night was. I saved a man who dreamed of his daughter. I lost another whose name I'll never know. I saw Larissa run through danger for a stranger and Katerina find her courage. I'm still here, still fighting because of you, because of Mama, because of home." She paused, her eyes on the horizon, then added, "I carry your sketches with me always." The letter was her way of holding on to herself, of giving shape to the chaos. She wrote of the factory's trembling walls, of the frost that gleamed in the dawn, of the scarf left in the mud. She wrote of Larissa's steady voice, Katerina's trembling hands, Andri's whispered plea. She didn't write of victory or defeat, those words belonged to others. She wrote of the small things, the taste of shared water, the hum of a folk song, the weight of a bandage in her hand. These were the truths of war, the human truths that lingered long after the shells fell silent. The factory stood as a testament to their night. Its walls scarred, but standing its floor, a map of their struggle. Yana looked at her team, Larissa cleaning her hands with a rag, her face softened by exhaustion. Katerina gathering the last of the supplies, her locket tucked safely away. Pavlo's soldiers, their rifles now at rest, shared a quiet nod, their eyes carrying the weight of survival. The town around them was broken but not gone. A church spire leaned but did not fall. A bird flitted through the mist, a flower clung to life. These were the signs Yana held onto, the sparks of hope in a world of gray. The war would continue its rhythm unrelenting, but so would they. Yana's team was ordered to remain at the factory to prepare for the next wave of wounded, the next night of fire and frost. But for now, they rested, their faces turned toward the dawn, their hearts heavy but unbroken. Yana thought of her mother's garden, of the poppies that bloomed through winter, and felt a quiet resolve. She was a medic, a daughter, a sister, a keeper of lives. She would carry on, her hands ready for the next call, her heart tethered to the home she fought for. To those who would hear this story, Yana's night was a mirror, reflecting the courage it took to face the dark, to choose life over fear. It was a call to see the humanity in the chaos, to honor the women who stood in the shadow of a war, their hands a bridge between despair and hope. What does it mean to save a life when the world is breaking? To hold fast to home when it feels so far away? These were the questions Yana's story left behind, not as answers but as invitations to feel, to think, to remember. The Donbas stretched out before her, its hills and ruins a testament to the lives that had fought here, loved here, dreamed here. Yana tucked the patch back into her kit, its threads a promise she'd keep. The war was not her story alone. It belonged to Larissa, to Katerina, to Andrei, to every soul who'd passed through the factory's doors. It belonged to the people watching, listening, hoping for a world where such nights were no longer needed. Subscribe to Ukraine Frontline War Stories to hear more untold tales of courage and share your thoughts. What does it mean to carry hope in the heart of war? This story was inspired by real events and people. Some details have been fictionalized for emotional narrative purposes.